something in me. Mael gently said that she would not press charges because we all make errors, while the family looked at me as if I were trash. 2 weeks later, she asked me to lunch. I assumed she wanted to apologize, but instead she pushed a check across the table. $50,000. When I didn't react, she wrote another one. $75,000, then $100,000. Every woman has a price, she explained. Name yours. She informed me that she had already done this effectively. I wasn't the most attractive gold digger her son had dated. Apparently the final straw occurred during a family meal in September. Mill had been unusually sweet for 2 weeks, which should have alerted me. She suggested we share images from our recent family beach trip. She connected her phone to the television. The first several images were normal. Then all of a sudden, I found myself kissing another man. I took multiple photos with this stranger at restaurants and places I'd never been to. The shadows were incorrect, and the metadata would have shown that they were false, but nobody noticed while marveling at the images on the large screen. She delivered an entire speech on safeguarding her son and obeying her maternal instincts. It turned out she had already shown these images to my husband's coworkers and acquaintances. She'd shielded him from the truth about his adulterous wife. I tried to defend myself, but she had prepared everyone wonderfully. The trek to my car, with the family whispering behind me, was the longest of my life. My husband requested some space to contemplate during the drive home. That's when I knew that was always her plan. She would never stop since destroying me was a part of her personality. Now, sitting in my car, watching him walk into our house without me, I made a decision. If she wanted to play with family secrets, we would do so. I hired my own investigator to look into her background. It took him 2 months to find the gold mine. Her husband's nephew bore no resemblance to his claimed father, but he did have her characteristic nose and green eyes. The time frame was very interesting. She had given birth to her first child 6 months early, but the cousin was 6 months older. The affair that resulted in him occurred when her spouse was on a business trip. I spent months as the defeated daughter-in-law. I apologized for the misunderstanding over the images. I thanked her for accepting me back into the family. Then, over Thanksgiving, I suggested a festive family activity for Christmas. Those ancestry DNA tests were really popular, and wouldn't it be incredible to trace the family bloodline? I played right into her ego by emphasizing how important family legacy was. She couldn't refuse without appearing suspicious. On Christmas morning, I handed out beautifully wrapped 23andMe kits to everyone. Mael tried to grin, but I could see panic in her eyes. The following 2 months were fantastic. The family group chat erupted with enthusiasm as members received their results. Everyone shares their ancestry percentages and locates distant relatives. Then the bomb dropped. The cousins' results revealed a half-sibling match with my husband. My father-in-law peered at the TV, unable to absorb what he was seeing. The remaining family members compared the results and confirmed the match. The mathematics was undeniable. Mill tried to claim that the test was incorrect, but science does not lie like she does. Watching her ideal family image disintegrate as she painfully sought to explain was poetic justice. Her husband had moved out within a week. The divorce papers mentioned infidelity and fraud. The family divided, with the majority cutting her off for her decades of hypocrisy. My spouse often apologized for questioning me. Family gatherings were shifted to our home, where she was not invited. I believed I had won. My birth control failed despite my precautions. The positive pregnancy test arrived at my office with roses. The card said, "Congratulations, grandmother knows." An untraceable text followed. "You took my family. Now I'll take what grows inside you and raise it properly." Blood is blood. She'd been playing a far longer game than I expected. My palms trembled as I glanced at the cards. The office suddenly felt too small and vulnerable. My coworker, Natalie, spotted my expression and ran over, but I waved her away and grabbed my purse. I needed to go home. The driving became a whirl of checking mirrors and making random turns. Each automobile behind me may be one of hers. At home, I locked the door and drew all of the curtains closed. My spouse discovered me seated on the bathroom floor 20 minutes later. The pregnancy test was still in my palm. He knelt alongside me, and I showed him the text. His visage shifted through many emotions before settling on fury. He contacted his mother immediately, but she did not respond. Then his phone vibrated with a message from her. "Congratulations on the baby. I can't wait to be involved every step of the journey." That night, we replaced the locks and built a security system. My husband took time off work to be with me. We altered our habits and avoided typical patterns, but she remained one step ahead. Baby things began arriving at our house with no return address, including a crib and a high chair, all of which were of high quality and impossible to trace. The psychological warfare escalated rapidly. She somehow obtained my work email and emailed congrats to the entire office, revealing my pregnancy before I had even seen a doctor. My supervisor called me aside to discuss maternity leave while I was still processing things. She had snatched my opportunity to communicate the news on my own terms. Then came medical intervention. I arrived at my first prenatal checkup to find she had already called, claiming to be me and attempting to get my medical information. When I checked in, the receptionist looked puzzled because I had just called to cancel. We spent an hour validating my identification and adding password security to my information. My husband confronted her at her apartment. I sat in the car, observing through the window as they argued. She stood there smiling and denying everything. When he returned, his hands shook. She'd decorated a full nursery in her spare room, had already chosen names, and informed him that she'd been consulting with lawyers regarding grandparent rights. The family was divided over how to handle her. Some relatives believed we were overreacting to a grandmother's excitement. Others had seen her ruin enough lives to know better. My father-in-law, who was still recovering from the divorce, volunteered to help in any way he could. He discovered years' worth of covert credit cards and accounts. She has resources we didn't expect. Week after week, her tactics became more daring. She arrived at my workplace with baby gifts, pressuring me to accept them in front of coworkers, or appear ungrateful. She joined every pregnant group and forum I created, constantly commenting directly after me. When I swapped groups, she found them as well. The breaking point occurred during my second trimester. I'd been cautious. Be careful. But somehow she found out about my doctor's visit. She entered the waiting area and took a seat next to me. I just smiled and picked up a parenting magazine. When they called my name, she also stood up. The nurse seems puzzled. As we approached, my mother-in-law kindly explained that she was here to support her daughter-in-law. I clearly informed them that she was not permitted to attend my appointment. She created a spectacle over being excluded from her grandchild's life, which was audible throughout the waiting area. Security had to accompany her out as she wailed about wanting to participate. That night, my husband and I devised a plan. If she chose to escalate, we'd be prepared. We began documenting everything. Every communication, unpleasant gift and appearance. We installed cameras throughout our property, updated all of our passwords, and placed alerts on our credit reports. But she also adapted. Instead, the gifts began to arrive at my husband's job. She befriended our neighbors, often inquiring about me and expressing worry for my health. She volunteered at the hospital where I intended to deliver. She got on the auxiliary board. She countered every move we made. My sister-in-law, Natalie, proved to be an unexpected ally. She had spent years watching her mother operate and was familiar with her tendencies. She cautioned us about the following phase. My mother-in-law attempted to separate me from my support system. Sure enough, anonymous notes began arriving at my acquaintances' houses, warning them of my alleged mental instability during pregnancy. The majority of friends saw through it, but some drifted aloof. My book group suddenly experienced scheduling issues anytime I was able to attend. I'm curious what motivates this mother-in-law to invest so much time and money in this situation. The private investigator, the false images, and now baby items. That's a lot of effort simply because she dislikes her daughter-in-law. My yoga instructor noted that someone had called to express concern about my exercising while pregnant. She was gradually shrinking my universe, until just she remained. Stress was having an impact on my health. My doctor remarked that my blood pressure was high. I couldn't sleep and jumped at every sound. My husband added motion sensors and additional cameras. However, technology could not stop psychological warfare. She was too intelligent to engage in anything that might be legally construed as harassment. Then we found her latest plot by chance. Daniel, my husband's cousin, and her secret son, became horrified with her after discovering the truth. He reached out, hoping to help. He had overheard her on the phone with someone, talking about nursing homes and power of attorney. She was looking into how to declare me incompetent owing to pregnancy-related mental health difficulties. The knowledge about her competency plot chilled my veins. I quickly made an appointment with my obstetrician to document my mental health state. My spouse joined me on every appointment, establishing a record of my stability and sensible decision-making. The doctor took note of everything in my file, knowing the gravity of the issue. After I outlined the harassment pattern, Daniel proved to be beneficial. In the following weeks, he began seeing his mother on a regular basis, claiming to reconcile while gathering intelligence. We learned from him that she had been speaking with a psychiatrist friend regarding postpartum psychosis symptoms, with the intention of using this angle after the birth. She'd even looked into which courts in our area were most sensitive to grandparent rights issues. My husband's work schedule grew unpredictable as he attempted to strike a balance between protecting me and preserving our finances. His mother began showing up at his office during critical meetings, forcing him to pick between his job and dealing with her interruptions. His supervisor, while first tolerant, became impatient with the continuous interruptions. The financial burden exacerbated an already stressful situation. Natalie proposed that we should be on the offense rather than just protecting. She'd been chronicling her mother's actions for years, including details of manipulation tactics used on other family members. We worked together to construct a detailed file that documented a decades-long history of harassment. Former girlfriends that my spouse had lost contact with suddenly made sense. They'd all been turned off by similar campaigns. The 20th week of my pregnancy marked a new development. I awoke to find our mailbox overflowing with pamphlets from adoption organizations. The message was plain. She wanted me to question my abilities to be a mother. My husband put a lockable mailbox the same day, but the psychological harm had already been done. Every usual pregnancy anxiety became exaggerated, as I wondered if she was correct about my parenting abilities. Our neighbors became unsuspecting pawns in her scheme. She'd become friends with the elderly couple next door, bringing them groceries and checking in on them every day. They thought she was amazing, not realizing she was asking them for information about our routines. When packages arrived, she'd intercept them in the name of being helpful, always knowing exactly what we'd ordered and when. My work performance decreased as I struggled to focus. Projects that would typically take hours turned into days as I continually watched surveillance footage on my phone. My supervisor expressed concern, which further added to my mother-in-law's story about my failing mental health. I forced myself to compartmentalize and refused to give her fodder for her competency allegations. Daniel learned her next move from a carelessly opened laptop. She had been communicating with a family law attorney about creating a paper trail for future custody disputes. Every present she had sent, every attempt to get involved, was being chronicled as proof of her dedication to the baby's well-being. Our resistance to recognize her involvement was turning into paranoid behavior on our side. The baby shower became a battleground. My buddies organized a modest gathering in an attempt to create a regular time amid the pandemonium. She somehow figured out the location and time. She did not disrupt the celebration. This would have been too clear. Instead, she sent an exquisite gift basket, which came during the gift opening ceremony and contained considerably more expensive items than anything my friends had donated. The card said, "With love from Grandma," in her unmistakable handwriting. My partner began to sleep poorly, resulting in persistent black circles beneath his eyes. He put an app on his phone that connected to all of our security cameras and checked it obsessively all night. Our connection weakened due to the continual scrutiny. Date nights turned into strategy sessions. Security alerts interrupted romantic moments. She was killing our marriage without ever physically touching either of us. Natalie told us that the holiday season was approaching. Her mother would always escalate during family gatherings, relying on tradition and witnesses to coerce compliance. Thanksgiving loomed like a thundercloud. Family members who had remained neutral began reaching out, urging us to explore reconciliation for the sake of the baby. The pressure increased from all sides. I formed a support group of other women who had faced with nasty in-laws. Their stories offered both comfort and horror. Some had eventually reached an agreement, while others had been fighting for years. They taught me documentation procedures and legal protections I had no idea existed. One woman described how her mother-in-law obtained partial custody by presenting herself as a stable alternative to a neurotic mother. During his reconnaissance visits, my husband's cousin divulged even more troubling information. His mother had been attending grandparents' support groups, portraying herself as a victim of an ungrateful daughter-in-law who was preventing her from seeing her grandchild. She had formed a network of sympathetic allies who were unaware of her actual character. Some even offered to serve as character witnesses if she took legal action. Stress expressed physically as my pregnancy proceeded. Headaches became constant companions. When I did get any sleep, it was accompanied by nightmares about her snatching my baby. My doctor prescribed minor anxiety meds that were safe to take throughout pregnancy, which I knew she would use against me if she found out. Every medical decision was weighed against potential legal repercussions. We discovered she'd been volunteering in the hospital's maternity unit for months, gaining favor with the nurses. She had grown particularly close to one nurse who worked in the birth unit, sharing anecdotes about her difficult daughter-in-law, who was keeping her from her grandchild. The notion that she might have allies there at my most vulnerable times threw me into a panic attack that took hours to subside. My husband faced his extended family, explaining the entire extent of her harassment. Some family now recognized the gravity of the situation, while others continued to believe we were overreacting. The family divide worsened as holiday plans became a quagmire of negotiations and bruised feelings. She played the victim brilliantly, a grandmother who only wanted to adore her granddaughter. Financial strain intensified as security measures depleted our funds. The nursery we envisioned became a fortress, with window locks and camera angles taking precedent over decor. Every dollar spent on protection was money not set aside for our child's future. She'd devised a means to rob our child before they were born. Daniel's intelligence collection revealed her most diabolical strategy yet. She had been investigating childcare courses and qualifications, putting together a resume that would make her look to be the more qualified caregiver. She even started working part-time at a daycare center to get professional childcare experience. Every move was planned to put herself in the best possible position if custody was ever called into question. My body altered as the pregnancy progressed, but I was unable to appreciate the miracle of creation. Each kick reminded me of what she intended to steal. Shopping for infant clothes becomes a reconnaissance expedition, looking for her automobile in parking lots and avoiding predictable stores. The thrill of getting ready for our child was marred by constant hypervigilance. Work became my main escape, but even that was threatened. She had began sending flowers to my office on a weekly basis, signed by your beloved mother-in-law. Colleagues thought it was sweet, not realizing the psychological toll each bouquet represented. I couldn't refuse them without appearing ungrateful. Could not explain without appearing paranoid. The 7th month saw a horrifying intensification. I was at home alone when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I noticed a woman I didn't recognize holding official-looking documents. She described herself as a social worker responding to a call regarding an at-risk pregnancy. Someone had indicated that I was in extreme mental distress and would endanger my unborn child. My hands shook as I dialed my husband's number, who had raced home from work. The social worker was professional yet thorough, checking our home and inquiring about my mental health history. She discovered nothing untoward, but the visit became part of the official record. My mother-in-law had devised a strategy to involve authorities without explicitly implicating herself. Natalie used her connections to assist us track down the complaint. It had been made anonymously through a tip line, thus it was hard to determine who had phoned. The social worker's report exonerated us, but the probe remained in the system. With this precedent established, any future complaints will be considered more seriously. She had prepared the groundwork for future attacks while retaining plausible deniability. Social workers are at the door, checking on your mental health. Mother-in-laws are playing chess while everyone else is fixated on checkers. However, utilizing child services as pawns appears to be a new low, even in her playbook. My husband's relationship with his mother had reached a breaking point. He drove to her apartment one evening and returned hours later, emotionally exhausted. She'd spent the entire time playing victim, wailing about missing her grandchild's development and showing him the nursery she'd set up. She even purchased a car seat for her vehicle in case of an emergency. Her illusion was so strong that she appeared to believe she was the aggrieved person. Sleep deprivation became more severe as my due date approached. Every night, I'd wake up several times to check the locks and cameras. My husband started sleeping in shifts, with one of us always on watch. The nursery remained half-finished because we prioritized security over looks. What should have been a period of joyous expectation turned into a siege mindset. She found methods to get around every barrier we put. We stopped her calls, so she utilized burner phones. When our routines changed, she adjusted her surveillance. She would infiltrate even the places we thought were safe. Her resources were limitless. Her determination was absolute. Fighting her was like battling smoke. She would evaporate just to resurface somewhere. The baby shower presents she sent haunted our house. We couldn't use them since we knew they were manipulative. But donating them felt like accepting defeat. They sat in our garage, pricey reminders of her existence. Each fashionable dress and high-end toy reflected another attempt to establish her claim on our child. My already stretched support system began to crack. Friends grew tired of the turmoil, unable to understand why we couldn't simply work things out with her. Family members who had initially backed us began suggesting compromises. The solitude she had planned was working. Even those who believed us became fatigued from the perpetual crisis mode. Daniel advised us that she was intensifying her legal preparations. She hired a well-known family law attorney who specializes in aggressive grandparent rights litigation. Her volunteer efforts, character witnesses and documented gift-giving had created a strong case for a loved grandma who was refused access. Our defensive actions were being seen as proof of our fragility. The 36th week of pregnancy came fresh anxieties. Labor was coming, and despite our efforts, she had established herself at the hospital. We discovered that she had been delivering treats to the maternity unit staff on a weekly basis, and had become a cherished fixture. The caregivers spoke affectionately of the sweet grandma, who only wanted to be a part of her grandchild's life. My spouse visited with hospital security to discuss the incident and provide evidence of the harassment. They pledged to limit her access during the delivery, but their sympathies were evident with the tearful grandma who had showed them baby images and recounted her grief. We recognized we couldn't rely on institutional protection after she spent months developing ties there. Natalie proposed an extreme measure: deliver at a different hospital. We explored facilities in nearby towns, hoping to find one where she didn't have connections. The logistics were hard, increasing the distance between us and our support system, but it appeared to be our only chance for a smooth birth. My mother-in-law must have sensed our plans. The gifts became more frequent, and they now arrive on a daily basis. She supplied the contact information for a professional photographer after having already scheduled and paid for newborn shots. A fancy stroller appeared on our porch. Each present came with cards expressing her love and enthusiasm, providing evidence of a kind grandma being turned down by ungrateful parents. At 37 weeks, stress caused a false labor. As we rushed to the hospital, I became concerned that she was aware of our presence. The contractions subsided after monitoring, but the episode left us shaken. How could we handle real labor while remaining hyper-vigilant against her interference? Our marriage counselor, one of the few professionals who understood the circumstances, assisted us in developing a birth plan that included security precautions. We developed code words, backup plans, and contingencies for a variety of circumstances. What was supposed to be a conversation about pain management and birthing positions turned into a strategic defense planning session. Daniel's final intelligence report before my due date was the most worrisome yet. His mother had been visiting with other estranged grandparents to learn about their success and failures in seeking access. She'd studied case law and knew exactly what evidence courts considered compelling. Her preparation was rigorous, regarding our child as a trophy to be obtained through legal maneuvers. The nursery camera alerted us to movement. One night, my husband watched the feed and saw a package on the windowsill, which had been placed there without triggering our property's motion sensors. Inside was a hand-knitted blanket and a note. Made with love for my grandchild. Soon. The underlying menace in that one word, soon, kept me awake till morning. My due date went, and the waiting grew excruciating. Every twinge may indicate the onset of labor, putting our carefully laid preparations to the test. She appeared to be aware that we were close. Her social media messages became more frequent, discussing the anticipation of becoming a grandma, and eliciting sorrow from friends who were unaware of the real tale. My husband took full family leave, refusing to leave me alone as we neared the end. His determination moved me, but I could see the strain in his tired eyes and rigid shoulders. She'd managed to take even these precious last moments of pregnancy, transforming what should have been an exciting preparation into frightening vigilance. The 39th week delivered a surprise ally. A nurse at our preferred hospital recognized my mother-in-law's photograph from our security briefing. She had previously worked at another hospital where my mother-in-law had volunteered, and she had witnessed similar conduct in another family. Her validation felt like a lifeline. Finally, someone in authority recognized the trend. Labor began at dawn on a Tuesday, 3 days after my due date. As contractions became very intense, my husband carried out our plan. He exclusively called our most trusted allies, using the code phrases we had developed. We took a convoluted path to the hospital, looking for followers. Even while working, I couldn't quit monitoring for potential hazards. The hospital security had our photographs and processes ready. They stationed someone near the maternity ward entrance and gave stern instructions. We'd registered using aliases to keep our true names off public forums. Every safeguard we could think of was in place, but would it be sufficient? Between contractions, I observed my husband coordinating our defense. He examined doors, verified employee identities, and communicated with our security network. What should have been his time to emotionally support me was spent defending against his mother's entrance, which she had also taken from us, the normal birth experience we deserved. As transition approached and the agony worsened, my concentration shifted to the immediate job of safely bringing our kid into this world. The months of tension, fear, and hypervigilance melted in comparison to the primitive urgency of labor. But even at those intense moments, a part of me stayed vigilant, waiting for her to emerge. Our daughter was delivered at 11:47 p.m., perfectly healthy despite the stress of pregnancy. As I held her for the first time, tears streamed down my cheeks. I felt overwhelmed with love and intense protectiveness. She was here. She was ours, and I would do anything to protect her from the lady who wished to take her. My husband's expression as he greeted his daughter cut through months of strain. For a time, we were just new parents, amazed at the tiny life we had made. But reality struck swiftly as he checked his phone to ensure our security network was still operational. Even at our most wonderful time, she cast a shadow. The nurse who recognized my mother-in-law from another hospital went beyond her shift to safeguard us. She kept our names off public notice boards, personally checked every visitor, and formed a safety zone around our small family. Her generosity and understanding of our predicament meant more than she knew. Recovery was a jumble of meal regimens and security screenings. We opted not to release any announcements or images, maintaining a strict information blackout. Family members who had demonstrated trustworthiness were granted brief visits under strict guidelines. The ordinary thrill of welcoming a new baby became a secret operation. On the second night, hospital security stopped my mother-in-law in the parking garage. She'd been circling the hospital for hours, apparently sensing our presence despite our precautions. They escorted her off the property, warning her about trespassing, but we knew she'd only get more inventive with her approaches. The next morning presented a new difficulty. My mother-in-law had identified the room we were in and left a gift basket outside our door. The nurses discovered it during their rounds and brought it in, believing it was from family. Inside, there were pricey baby clothing and a card professing her affection for her grandchild. My husband quickly reported it to security, but the harm had been done. She knew where we were. We chose to leave the hospital early. The doctor cleared us after determining that both the baby and I were healthy enough. My spouse directed the automobile to a secondary door while security created a distraction at the main exit. We tucked our kid into her car seat and slipped away unnoticed, feeling like fugitives from our own home. At home we discovered additional evidence of her existence. Fresh flowers on our porch, a parcel from a high-end baby store. Our security cameras showed she arrived at 3 a.m., carefully avoiding the motion sensors she had obviously pre-mapped. The invasion into our space while we were at our most vulnerable felt deliberate and nasty. The timing of her parking garage arrival while they are still in the hospital appears to be very convenient. How did she find out they were there? Despite the fake names and security procedures, Daniel contacted with vital news. His mother had been meeting with a family court mediator, presenting herself as a caring grandmother attempting to establish contact with her grandchild. She had brought images of the nursery she had planned, receipts for all of the presents we had declined, and character references from her grandparents' support group. The mediator appeared sympathetic to her cause. My husband took swift action. He gathered all of our material into one complete dossier that included the pattern of harassment, security footage, threatening texts, and witness statements from hospital workers who had observed her behavior. We wanted to be prepared in case she pursued legal action, though we hoped to escape that nightmare. The first week at home with our daughter should have been fantastic. Instead, we lived in constant readiness. Every knock on the door sent my heart racing. When neighbors went over to congratulate her, I looked for clues that they had been speaking with her. The baby monitor became another security camera to obsess over. Natalie arrived with alarming intelligence. Her mother was spotted outside our pediatrician's office, presumably attempting to figure out where we'd be taking the baby for checkups. She'd also been begging family members for images of the infant, playing the victim of being cut off from her granddaughter's life. Some relatives began to crumble under her influence. We quickly changed pediatricians, heading to 3 towns away. The extra distance was exhausting for a newborn, but necessary. We enrolled using privacy protocols and explained the circumstance to the staff. They were understanding, but they clearly believed we were overreacting to family turmoil. If only they knew the whole scope. My mother-in-law has upped her psychological warfare. She created a social media page called Grandmother's Love Denied and posted poetry about missing her grandchild. She never mentioned our names, but family members knew exactly who she meant. Strangers expressed pity in the comments area, unaware of her actual nature. My husband reported the page, but she had been cautious not to post anything that violated the terms of service. Sleep deprivation makes things more difficult. Between feeding times and security concerns, neither of us had more than 2 hours at a time. My husband's paternity leave was running short, and I was frightened of being alone with the baby. Not because I couldn't handle parenting, but because I'd be open to whatever she had planned next. We engaged a security consultant with expertise in stalking situations. He inspected our procedures and offered enhancements, such as a panic button system and greater video coverage. The expense was too expensive, but my father-in-law secretly contributed, feeling bad about the monster he had inadvertently enabled for decades. During those difficult times, his encouragement was invaluable. The consultant also suggested that we change our routines frequently, never leaving at the same time, take various routes, and shop at random stores. Living like Wei was hard, but it was effective. We didn't see her for 3 weeks. I began to hope that she had given up. That hope was dashed when Daniel realized her new plan. She had been making the argument that we were isolating the baby from extended family, resulting in an unhealthy atmosphere. She'd documented every family gathering we'd missed, every invitation we'd turned down. In her story, we were the ones who harmed the child by denying her a relationship with caring relatives. My husband's job worsened due to his distractions and frequent absences. His mother had harmed several business relationships by calling his co-workers and expressing concern about his mental health since becoming a father. His manager approached him for a chat about work-life balance, apparently affected by what she had told them. We chose to go on the offensive. My spouse met with each family member individually and showed them our documents. Some were stunned by the evidence. Others remained convinced that we were overreacting. The DNA revelation exacerbated the family schism, forcing everyone to choose sides. During one of these visits, an aunt shared something important. My mother-in-law had already done this to my husband's father's sister decades earlier. She'd been kicked out of the family because my mother-in-law told everyone she was unstable. The aunt had relocated across the nation and stopped all contact. We followed her down and heard her story, which strangely resembled our own. We felt more assured after implementing this pattern of action. We were not crazy or overreacting. This was her predetermined technique of eradicating threats to her authority. The aunt submitted written testimony regarding her encounter, contributing to our increasing collection of evidence. My mother-in-law must have noticed the tide turning. Her techniques got increasingly desperate. She arrived at my husband's workplace with a lawyer, seeking to discuss grandmother rights. Security removed them, but not before numerous co-workers witnessed the incident. She had succeeded in making our private misery public. That night, we faced a difficult decision. We would relocate not only to another neighborhood, but out of state. My husband began job seeking in cities where we had no connections, and she was unable to follow. It meant quitting our support system, but remaining had become intolerable. Natalie helped us organize the relocation in secret. We utilized her address for job applications, conducted interviews via video chat, and made plans via encrypted communication. It was severe, but considering her resourcefulness, any precaution seemed justified. My husband got a job offer in a place 8 hours away. The position was really better than his present one, with understanding bosses who valued his candor about his family circumstances. We began to arrange our departure like a military operation. We couldn't utilize typical movers since they might be questioned or bribed. Instead, friends helped us pack in the middle of the night, filling a rental truck in shifts. We left furniture behind rather than risking an extended moving period. Our daughter slept through everything, blissfully ignorant of the disruption her presence had caused. The most difficult thing was leaving without saying goodbye to supportive family members. Any information could potentially reach my mother-in-law via the family grapevine. We left letters for Natalie to distribute when we departed, explaining our decision and promising to reconnect when we were settled and safe. On our last night, I strolled around our empty house, holding our daughter in my arms. This was not how I had envisaged beginning our family life. But when I glanced at her serene expression, I knew we were making the correct decision. She deserved to grow up in an environment devoid of manipulation and psychological warfare. We departed at 3 a.m. On a Wednesday, we took a roundabout route that added hours to our trip. My husband frequently checked the mirrors while I soothed our daughter in the back seat. Every automobile that trailed us for more than a few exits set our hearts racing. However, mile by mile, the strain began to subside. Daniel called while we were almost halfway to our destination. His mother had found we had left and was in complete breakdown mode. She had contacted the police, claiming that we had kidnapped her grandchild, but they had immediately rejected her because she couldn't prove any custodial rights. She had driven to our vacant house and stood in the driveway yelling, until neighbors phoned the cops. We arrived in our new city, fatigued, yet eager. The rental house was small, but it had enough security features. We chose it because of the gated yard and away from major traffic. As we brought our daughter across the threshold, I felt a sensation I hadn't had in months. Peace. The first several weeks were filled with pandemonium as everyone adjusted. New physicians, new routines, and new everything. But without the constant danger of her presence, we could finally appreciate our baby. I watched as my hubby gradually relaxed. The tightness in his shoulders dissipated as days went by without incident. We maintained stringent information security. There are no social media or public records updates. All is done through lawyers and encrypted methods. Natalie served as our communication hub for safe family members. We heard from her that my mother-in-law had hired a private investigator to find us. However, we had thoroughly concealed our tracks. 3 months into our new existence, I felt comfortable enough to join a local mothers group. Using only my first name, I started a new support network. The other mothers knew nothing about our past. The familiarity of seeing simply another family adjusting to parenting was soothing. My spouse excelled in his new position. He could now focus on his job without having to deal with continual crises. His confidence returned when he established new professional contacts free of his mother's poison. Watching him become the father he'd always wanted to be, free of her shadow, made me happy. Our daughter grew up in a loving and stable environment. She learned to smile, giggle, and crawl in a family where tension was not constant. Each milestone seemed like a success, not just for her growth, but also for our escape from the toxic environment that threatened to define her early life. Natalie returned after 6 months, conducting rigorous counter-surveillance to ensure she was not followed. She informed me that my mother-in-law's behavior had worsened to the point where even her most ardent supporters were withdrawing. Without us as targets, her instability became impossible to conceal. Several family members had contacted Natalie to apologize for not believing us sooner. The legal threats never resulted in actual court action. Without knowing where we were, she couldn't submit anything significant. Her lawyer evidently dropped her after discovering the severity of her harassment. Talk about playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. Hiring a security consultant for family turmoil is a higher level of problem solving. However, calling it family drama is like calling a hurricane mildly breezy weather. She had alienated the grandparent support groups by becoming too harsh for them. As our daughter's first birthday approached, I thought on her journey. We'd lost our house, our town, and the proximity of dear family members. But we had gained something extremely precious. Freedom from a lady who would have ruined our daughter's childhood via manipulation and control. We celebrated quietly, only the three of us. A tiny cake, a few presents, and the gift of calm normalcy. As I watched our kid crush icing into her hair, giggling with delight, I knew every sacrifice had been worthwhile. She would grow up with only good affection. We had never experienced the psychological warfare that had nearly destroyed us. My husband and I had risen stronger from the fire of mutual adversity. We'd learned to follow our instincts, safeguard our family, and prioritize peace over exposure to toxins. Our daughter would eventually learn her story, but for now, all she knew was protection and love. The future spread before us, full of possibilities, unhindered by her grandmother's shadow. We'd start new traditions, make new memories, and raise our daughter to be confident and secure. The cost of independence had been steep, but the tranquility we had discovered was invaluable. Our small family had won by choosing distance over devastation and obscurity over concern. In our new lives, we were just another young family in a peaceful neighborhood. No drama, no stalking, and no psychological warfare. Just the lovely, laborious routine of raising a child in peace. My mother kept trying to win my little sister's love until an accident she caused left my sister unable to walk forever. It started with a photo. My mom made my little sister write, "I love mommy more," across my dad's face. He beamed as his face sank. When I urged her to quit fighting for Sophie's affection, she rolled her eyes and claimed she had already chosen her favorite. "I'm just making sure she doesn't forget." I remained mute. That was 5 months ago. This morning she was dragging her fingernails along our garden fence, screaming Sophie's name as blood flowed from her hands. When my 7-year-old sister said she loved her father more, Mom was preparing dinner when Sophie rushed up to her and grabbed her skirt. Mommy, come, Daddy's wearing my Elsa costume, he looks so funny." Mom laughed, but said she was too busy to go look. And Sophie humorously responded, "Ooh, I'm Mommy, I cook, I'm too bored to have fun." She then giggled. "That's why I love Daddy more." She dashed back to play. Mom shrugged it off, but I could tell from her eyes that the comment pained her. Mom helped erect the fort the next day after dinner. She crawled through the blanket tunnels with Sophie. They even made silly voices for the plush animals. When Sophie requested for ice cream after dinner, Mom immediately said yes. Dad raised an eyebrow, but Mom simply winked at him. Then continued to make Sophie giggle by putting ice cream on Dad's nose and licking it off. A few days later, I saw Mom and Sophie roll down the slope in our backyard. Mom's pricey birthday sundress was completely ruined by grass stains and muck. Dad looked frightened, but Mom simply shrugged. Memories matter more than dresses. We all thought it was very cute. Until then, Mom's behaviors had become more than just entertaining. Dad returned home from work with a new puzzle for him and Sophie to complete. When Mom saw it, she quickly stated that she and Sophie were going to have ice cream. "Just us girls tonight." Dad's face dropped, but he did not dispute. Worse, it became a pattern. Every night, Mom would plan a unique activity for herself and Sophie that excluded Dad entirely. I recall one particular Saturday during family drawing time the next day. Mom repeatedly whispered to Sophie. I watched her push Sophie to depict Dad with a pout and write, "I love Mommy more," at the top. When Dad viewed the photo, his shoulders dropped. Mom immediately smiled as if she had won something. A few days later, Mom grabbed finger paint and began painting straight on our living room walls with Sophie. When Dad tried to stop them, Mom grabbed Sophie's hand and they fled outside, chuckling. Dad and I spent 3 hours cleaning the walls clean. 2 days later, I was searching for Christmas decorations in the attic. I caught Mom lifting Sophie through the gap and onto the roof. The roof lacked safety railings and sloped sharply. I screamed for her to stop and she rolled her eyes. "We're just having fun. You're as boring as your father." The car incident occurred on a Tuesday. Dad and I left Sophie and Mom in the van while we went to the shop for munchies. But when we got out, what we saw made our mouths drop. Sophie was driving Mom's SUV. Mom was in the passenger seat urging, "Press harder on the pedal, sweetie." Sophie pressed too hard and smashed into a parked car. The owner rushed out a few minutes later. Dad accepted responsibility right away and handed over his insurance information as well as $500 in cash. Mom was praising Sophie how fantastic she did. That night I went to check on Sophie. She was cuddled up on her princess bed, and when I sat down, she whispered, "Mommy is starting to scare me." Dad and I staged an intervention the following morning. We took Mom down and discussed how she frightened Sophie with her unsafe behavior. Mom's face turned red. "You're ganging up on the fun parent. Sophie loves me more now." She said so. We tried to reason with her, but she stormed away. The next day, Dad realized that Mom had emptied their entire savings account. $4,000 gone. He found the receipt. She had purchased a large commercial-grade bouncy castle for her lawn. "Sophie will love this," she remarked when confronted. A few days later, I returned home from school to discover Sophie in the backyard, carrying Dad's axe. She had blood trickling down her leg from a gash. Mom stood nearby, clapping. "Come on, sweetie. This is fun. Don't mind the cut. Tough girls don't cry." Sophie looked like she was about to sob. I took the axe and Dad carried Sophie inside to bandage her leg. Mom followed us, shouting at us for wrecking everything. That night we got down with Mom and informed her quite bluntly. Either she stops or Dad and I leave. She scoffed at first, but as she understood we were serious, she agreed to back down. Well, that lasted 2 days. That was when we received a direct call from Mom. She was sobbing so hard we couldn't understand her. I messed up. I messed up real bad. Come to the hospital now." We exceeded every speed limit on our way to the ER and discovered Mom in the waiting room. Her clothing were wet, and she was shaking. She explained what happened with uncontrollable sobbing. She had taken Sophie to the old quarry for some swimming fun. She encouraged Sophie to jump into the ocean from higher and higher rocks. She told us Sophie was afraid after jumping from 20 feet and injuring her ankle. She told her mother that she did not want to jump anymore. Mom cried, stating she had a dreadful gut feeling and should have stopped. But she really wanted to be a fun mom. She virtually coerced Sophie into jumping from the 30-foot cliff. The rock was salty and slippery. Sophie misplaced her leg while making the leap. She hit the shallow water incorrectly. Mom stated that there was a massive crack, and Sophie was not waking up. She was alive when she carried her inside. However, doctors refused to make any promises. We waited at the ER for 12 hours. When the doctor finally appeared, they broke the news. Sophie's spinal cord was almost completely severed at L2. She might never walk again. It was the first time I'd ever seen Dad cry. They let us see Sophie briefly after another hour. She was medicated but conscious. When she noticed us, her gaze turned to Mom. "You scare me, Mommy. Get away from me." The hospital security guard approached us and requested Mom to go outside. She began to resist, but Dad grabbed her arm firmly and led her down the hallway. I remained with Sophie, clutching her small hand as equipment beeped around us. Her gaze kept darting to the door, ensuring that Mom would not return. Through the window, I saw Dad's expression shift from one of grief to one of anger. His mouth clenched as Mom gestured madly, apparently attempting to explain herself. She kept pointing back to Sophie's room. However, every time she tried to return, Dad blocked her route. The doctor returned with a clipboard and began detailing Sophie's condition to me. I was the only family member present. He gave me x-rays on a tablet, indicating the injured vertebrae. The words partial paralysis and significant rehabilitation slipped by me. All I could see was Sophie's little figure in that big hospital bed. Dad returned alone 20 minutes later. His eyes were crimson. but his face was determined. He kissed Sophie's forehead and said something I couldn't understand. Then he turned to me and beckoned for us to enter the hallway. Outside Sophie's room, Dad took out his phone and began making calls. First, he called his mother, my grandma, and asked her to come right away. Then he contacted his brother, a contractor who lived 2 hours away. Every talk was brief and urgent. Between calls he kept looking back to Sophie's room. Mom arrived at the end of the hall, attempting to approach again. I heard raised words as a nurse intercepted her. Dad did not even look up from his phone. He was scrolling through something, and his face became darker with each swipe. Later that evening, Grandma arrived carrying an overnight bag. She hugged us both tightly and headed straight to Sophie's bedside. Sophie's features softened somewhat as she spotted her. Grandma had always been her safe haven, reading her goodnight stories and baking her favorite cookies. Dad called me away while Grandma was sitting with Sophie. He showed me his phone's screen. Mom had previously written about the horrific tragedy on social media, using crying emojis and requesting prayers. The responses were filled with sympathy and support. Nobody knew exactly what had transpired. Sophie awoke the next morning feeling more aware. Physical therapists arrived to evaluate her. They moved her legs lightly to test for sensation. Sophie winced, but felt nothing below her knees. The therapist took notes on her record as she explained the long path ahead. Mom attempted to visit again during the shift change. She had brought a large teddy bear and balloons. The staff had evidently been told not to let her in without Dad's approval. She left the gifts at the nurse's station, and I noticed her crying in the elevator as the doors closed. Dad's brother Lucas came that afternoon. The two men crowded in the corner of the waiting room, conversing quietly. Lucas continued to shake his head and run his hands through his hair. I overheard parts of their chat about emergency custody and papers. Sophie underwent her first operation 2 days later to fix her spine. We waited in the surgery waiting room. Dad paced back and forth while Grandma knitted to keep her hands occupied. Mom arrived midway through, but hospital security led her to a separate waiting room after Dad spoke with them. The procedure went smoothly, but the surgeon's update was grim. Sophie would need several months of physical rehabilitation. She might recover some function, but walking normally seemed improbable. Dad's fist tightened so firmly that his knuckles became white. Dad made more phone calls that night when Sophie was sleeping. This time he contacted his bank, insurance company and work regarding family medical leave. He was building something, prepping for something, but I wasn't sure what. Mom sent me dozens of text messages, images of Sophie as a baby, videos of them playing together, and lengthy essays about how sorry she was. I did not respond. Every time my phone buzzed, I remembered Sophie's horrified expression as she asked her mother to leave. On the 4th day, the social worker paid a visit. She interviewed each of us separately, asking detailed questions about Sophie's home life and the circumstances that led up to her injuries. The pattern here demonstrates how Mom's demand for recognition absolutely outweighs her parenting judgment. Consider how she frames every interaction as a competition with Dad, rather than focusing on Sophie's genuine needs or safety. Dad had prepared a packet with printed screenshots of Mom's social media posts, bank statements indicating depleted savings, and images of Sophie with the axe wound. Sophie began physical therapy while still in the hospital. The therapist assisted her with simple exercises aimed at maintaining muscular tone in her paralyzed legs. Sophie tried so hard, her face wrinkled in concentration, but her legs wouldn't follow her directions. Mom snuck in during a shift change. I discovered her standing over Sophie's bed, stroking her hair and muttering apologies. Sophie's monitor began beeping faster, and her heart rate spiked. She forced her eyes tight, pretending to sleep. I punched the call button and informed the nurse that Mom was not meant to be there. Mom turned against me, her face twisted with rage. She accused me of poisoning Sophie against her, siding with Dad, and destroying their particular link. Security arrived before she could say anything else. Dad moved quickly after that. He met with a family lawyer advised by Lucas and gathered all of the data we'd gathered, including images of the finger paint on the walls, the bill for the bouncy castle, medical papers from Sophie's axe wound, and witness statements from neighbors who had seen Mom put Sophie on the roof. The house felt empty without Sophie's laughter. Dad and I took turns staying at the hospital, ensuring that someone was constantly with her. We packed her favorite books, teddy animals, and anything else that might help make the sterile room feel more like home. Mom's behavior worsened. She showed up at my school, hoping to persuade me to speak with Dad on her behalf. She contacted Dad's workplace repeatedly until his boss intervened. She even called Sophie's teacher, telling him stories about how her father was keeping her away from her daughter. One evening when Dad was meeting with the lawyer, I sat with Sophie and ate dinner. She could only take a few bites of hospital food. She asked me quietly if she would ever walk again. I did not know how to respond. Grandma moved in briefly to assist. She cooked meals, cleaned laundry, and ensured that I arrived at school on time. She also served as a guard at the hospital, turning away Mom when she attempted to visit during Dad's shifts. The medical expenses began arriving. Even with insurance, the expenses were enormous. Dad spent several hours on the phone with billing departments, insurance companies, and the hospital's financial aid office. The stress was evident in the fresh creases on his face. Sophie experienced both good and bad days. Sometimes she pushed hard in physical therapy, determined to regain sensation in her legs. Other times she just wailed, wondering why Mommy had her leap off the cliff. The therapist stated that the emotional damage may take longer to heal than the physical ailments. Mother hired her own lawyer. The house received papers claiming visiting rights. Dad crumpled them up and dumped them in the trash before retrieving and smoothing them out, knowing he'd need them for paperwork. Lucas assisted Dad with the installation of security cameras throughout the home. They installed new locks on all of the doors and windows. Dad didn't say it out, but we all knew he was concerned about what Mom would do next. Sophie's 7th week in the hospital resulted in a tiny breakthrough. Throughout therapy, she had tingling in her left foot. The therapist told us not to set our expectations too high, but Sophie smiled for the first time since the accident. Mom's social media messages became increasingly unpredictable. She published old images of herself and Sophie, with remarks about being separated from her baby. She mentioned Dad's business, my school, and even the hospital. Dad documented everything and added it to his growing file. The night before Sophie's discharge, we held a family meeting in her room. Dad said that she would be returning home, but everything will be altered. We had transformed the dining room into a bedroom because she could not climb stairs. A wheelchair ramp was being constructed. Physical therapists would visit the house 3 times a week. Sophie listened carefully before asking if Mommy would be there. Dad knelt beside her bed and pledged to keep her safe. She nodded, entirely trusting him, but I saw terror in her eyes. As we prepared to take Sophie home, I reflected on how much had changed in just 2 months. Our family was fractured, possibly beyond repair, but Sophie was still alive, which was all that counted. The real war has barely begun. The wheelchair ramp installation crew arrived at dawn. I looked out the window as they measured and cut lumber, the roar of power tools drowning out the morning birds. Dad oversaw every aspect, measuring angles and testing the surface. Sophie sat in her improvised wheelchair on the porch, her hands holding the armrests. Mom's automobile pulled up across the street. She sat there for 20 minutes, simply watching. Dad noticed but continued working with the crew. When Mom eventually got out and approached, Dad stopped her on the walkway. Their conversation lasted less than a minute before Mom stormed back into her car and drove away. Sophie's first night home was tough. The hospital bed we had leased barely fit into the renovated dining room. She awoke crying 3 times, disoriented and asking for assistance. Every time, Dad or I raced to her side. Grandma slept on the couch nearby, eager to help. The next morning, we had our first home physical therapy session. Olivia, a patient woman, spent an hour working with Sophie. She demonstrated exercises to assist us maintain muscular tone and avoid problems. Sophie fought with each movement, sweat dripping on her forehead. Mom attempted another visit that afternoon. This time, she brought Sophie's favorite aunt, evidently thinking that familial pressure would allow her access. Dad stood hard by the door. The aunt appeared uneasy, caught between family members. After they went, Dad discovered a gift bag on the porch with expensive toys and a note begging for forgiveness. I hesitantly returned to school, apprehensive about abandoning Sophie. My teachers had been apprised of the issue and were providing assignment extensions. During lunch, I spotted Mom's car in the guest parking area. The principal then informed me she attempted to sign me out early, citing a family emergency. Sophie's progression remained modest. The tingle in her left foot fluctuated unpredictably. Sometimes she could wiggle her toes slightly. Other days produced no sensation at all. The physical therapist cautioned us that spinal injuries are unpredictable. Recovery is non-linear. Dad found that Mom had been calling Sophie's doctors, pretending to be his assistant, to obtain medical updates. The hospital tightened its information processes. Following that, only fathers could receive updates, and only in person with proper identification. Lucas spent the weekends assisting his father with modifying the house to accommodate Sophie's needs. They added grab bars to the restroom, expanded entrances and made smooth transitions between rooms. Sophie watched from her wheelchair, occasionally pointing out areas where she required extra support. Mom's tactics evolved. She began sending gifts via delivery services, including cuddly animals, novels, and art equipment. Each parcel had messages expressing her love and minimizing the incident. Dad photographed everything before storing everything in the garage, creating a documentation file. The medical expenditures continued to grow. Even with payment arrangements, the financial hardship was evident. Dad sold his motorcycle and worked more shifts whenever possible. Grandmother contributed from her pension. We made sacrifices together to assist Sophie's rehabilitation. Sophie's emotional condition changed dramatically. Some days, she resembled her former self, laughing at cartoons and playing with toys. Other days, she didn't say anything, staring at her unmoving legs with hollow eyes. The trauma counselor came twice a week and used play therapy to help her cope. Mom showed up for one of Sophie's physical therapy sessions. She had somehow figured out the timetable and waited till Dad went out to take a work call. Olivia abruptly halted the session and wheeled Sophie to her bedroom, while I blocked Mom's route. Her anguished pleas rang throughout the house until her father reappeared and let her out. The security cameras proved their worth repeatedly. They caught Mom trying to enter through the back gate at night, testing windows and even attempting to befriend our elderly neighbor in order to gain access to the house. Dad collected the footage and added it to his ever-growing archive. Sophie's scholastic circumstance necessitated cautious planning. She couldn't go back to her normal classroom yet. The district supplied a home tutor 3 days per week. Sophie struggled with the adjustment, missing her pals and her usual routine. We scheduled video conferences with students in an attempt to retain some normalcy. Mom's lawyer wrote more hostile letters requesting access. They questioned Dad's decisions, suggested mistreatment, and threatened legal action. Dad's lawyer answered by providing evidence of Mom's harmful behavior and Sophie's explicit fear of her mother. One morning, I discovered that Mom had slipped dozens of printed photos under our door from before the accident, depicting joyful moments between her and Sophie. The manipulation was evident, yet it ached to witness those memories weaponized. Sophie reached a significant milestone in week 10. She stood with support for 30 seconds. The physical therapist used parallel bars to help her get out of her wheelchair. Her legs shook furiously, but supported her weight. We all sobbed, including Olivia. Mom's social media campaign escalated. She started a blog chronicling her unfair separation from Sophie, portraying herself as a victim of her father's domineering actions. Friends and distant relatives began phoning after only hearing Mom's story. Dad declined to speak publicly, instead focusing on Sophie's care. The financial burden compelled severe judgments. Dad pondered selling the house in favor of something smaller and more accessible to Sophie. Lucas offered to buy Dad's truck and loan it back to him, which moved Dad to tears. Mom is playing lawyer ping pong, while Sophie is learning to walk again. Talk about priorities becoming as twisted as a pretzel in a blender. The security cameras recording her window shopping at midnight like a bargain burglar demonstrate her problem-solving abilities. We were running out of resources. Sophie's improvement has plateaued, which is frustrating. The initial gains ceased, leaving her with little sensation and little functional movement below the knees. The doctors altered their expectations, referring to permanent modifications rather than full healing. Mom tried to ambush us during a medical checkup. She approached the parking garage as her father transported Sophie from the car to a wheelchair. Sophie began hyperventilating, and her entire body shook. Security intervened while I consoled Sophie, but the harm had been done. She refused to leave the house for several days following. Grandma's health deteriorated as a result of her stress. She acquired high blood pressure and required her own medical appointments. The role reversal was difficult. She had come to assist us, but she now needed care for herself. Dad recruited a part-time assistant, which was another expenditure we couldn't afford. Sophie's birthday approached, her first after the catastrophe. She requested a quiet celebration with only her family. My heart ached as she said, "No, Mommy." We arranged a low-key celebration with her favorite cake and a few homemade gifts. Mom discovered the birthday idea on social media. A cousin had casually mentioned it. She arrived with a huge present and demanded entrance. Dad forcefully blocked the door as she yelled accusations. Sophie heard everything from her room and sobbed into her pillow. The event caused Dad to file for a restraining order. The lawyer stated, "We had enough documentation, but the process would take time." Meanwhile, Mom's harassment persisted through every possible channel. Sophie began experiencing nightmares about water. She would wake up gasping, as if she were drowning. The trauma counselor increased their appointments, but progress was gradual. Sophie refused to take baths, instead allowing for brief showers while grasping safety bars. Mom enlisted the help of flying monkeys, as well as friends and family members who believed her story. They called frequently, left messages, and even arrived at our door. Each contact depleted our energy and time, which we required for Sophie's care. Lucas found that Mom was spreading accusations about Dad at work, accusing him of being harsh and domineering. Dad's supervisor, fortunately, recognized the reality and supported him. However, co-workers' murmurs and stares added an additional degree of tension. Sophie's incremental advances became our lifeline. She learned how to shift herself from bed to wheelchair with little aid. She could take a shower while sitting down, using grasp bars. Each small independence win felt tremendous. Mom's attempts became increasingly imaginative and scary. She hired a private detective to photograph our regular activities. She asked Sophie's old babysitter to check on everything. She even phoned my school counselor to express her concerns about my home life. The breaking point occurred during Sophie's swim treatment session. It was her first time near water since the accident, in a carefully supervised therapy setting. Sophie was making progress, floating with help, when Mom emerged through the pool's glass observation window. Sophie noticed her and panicked, breathing water and choking. Sophie was hysterical and fought everybody who tried to touch her, so the therapist had to remove her out right away. Sophie vomited from fright at the end of the session and refused to continue with therapy. Dad eventually snapped. He addressed Mom in the parking lot as I remained with Sophie. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see Dad's controlled rage, Mom's theatrical motions, and finally her speeding away. Dad returned, shaking with wrath. That night we had an emergency family meeting. Dad, Grandma, Lucas and I spoke about alternatives as Sophie slept. The situation was untenable. Mom's rising behavior was impeding Sophie's improvement. We needed a permanent answer. Lucas offered going out of state and starting over somewhere Mom couldn't follow. Grandma was concerned about Sophie's medical team and established care. Dad investigated legal possibilities in other jurisdictions. I just wanted Sophie to feel safer again. Sophie must have overheard as she wheeled herself out. Tears flowed. She begged us not to force her to leave her doctors and her room, which were the only sources of stability she had. We pledged to find another way. Dad spent the following few days on the phone with attorneys, social workers, and advocacy organizations. The restraining order papers progressed slowly. Mom's attorney fought every step, requesting psychological assessments and supervised visitation. Mom's behavior indicated that she was unraveling. Her social media messages become increasingly nonsensical. She shared previous footage of Sophie walking, running, jumping, and all the stuff she had stolen from her. The wickedness was astounding. One afternoon, while Dad was in a legal meeting and Grandmother was napping, I heard a commotion in the backyard. Through the glass, I noticed Mom attempting to demolish a portion of our new fence. She was crying and tearing at the planks with her bare hands. I contacted Dad right away and kept Sophie distracted in her room. Mom's hands had bled on the fence by the time Dad came with Lucas. They discovered her prostrate in the yard, sobbing about wanting to see her baby. The police arrived this time. Mom was brought for a mental evaluation. Dad battled with contradictory emotions. Anger over what she'd done to Sophie, but also grief at her apparent mental decline. We could all feel how terrible everything had gone. Sophie detected a difference in the house that evening. She wondered whether Mama was unwell, and that was why she did such horrible things. We attempted to describe mental health in ways that a 7-year-old might comprehend while validating her anxiety and rage. The psychiatric hold lasted for 72 hours. During that time, we had an experience that we almost forgot about. Peace. Sophie relaxed slightly, participated more in therapy, and even smiled during a video conversation with her schoolmates. When Mom was released, she was given medication and required therapy. Her lawyer called her father about a suggested deal. Mom would remain away if Dad lifted the restraining order. Dad declined, understanding that we required legal protection. Sophie's rehabilitation progressed positively during her mother's absence. She regained sensation in her left foot and could now move her toes deliberately. The physical therapist was cautiously optimistic about the possibility of partial mobility through intense therapy. We used the quiet moment to build better procedures. Sophie began attending online school sessions and maintained regular contact with her teacher and classmates. She joined a virtual support group for kids with spinal injuries. She was slowly creating a new normal. Mom's return to pestering was quick, but different. The drug appeared to reduce her intensity, but not her determination. She wrote to Sophie through her lawyer, proposing various concessions, monitored visits, phone calls, and even just letters. Dad spoke with Sophie's trauma counselor about the proposals. The counselor was straightforward. Sophie was not prepared for any contact. The terror was still too raw. The trauma is too recent. Forcing interaction could result in major setbacks. We focused on minor successes. Sophie learned how to prepare basic meals from her wheelchair. She began drawing